What if the moon, that familiar light suspended in the night sky, is not what it seems? For centuries, poets have written verses to it, farmers have tracked its phases, and sailors have steered by its glow. We think of it as constant, a silent companion circling the Earth. But what if this companion is not a natural wanderer of the cosmos, but something else entirely? What if the moon is a machine, ancient, engineered, and placed in orbit with purpose? The idea sounds strange, even unsettling. Yet this very thought has echoed through the decades. Scientists, astronauts, historians, and dreamers have each in their own way brushed against anomalies that do not fit the tidy picture of a simple, rocky satellite. Whispers of strange sounds recorded on early Apollo missions' seismic readings that behave unlike any other planetary body and myths from cultures far older than modern astronomy. Together they weave a tapestry of questions too persistent to ignore. Imagine the moon as a sentinel, not a stone. Its face pockmarked with craters may be only a mask. Beneath that mask, some theorists argue could lie vast chambers or mechanisms still humming faintly after millennia. From this vantage, the moon is not merely reflecting the sun's light, it may be watching us, monitoring Earth with quiet patience. Why would anyone or anything create such a device? Some suggest surveillance, a cosmic watchtower keeping track of the rise and fall of civilizations. Others imagine it as a stabilizer ensuring Earth's delicate balance of tides, seasons, and climate. And then there are those who view it as something far more enigmatic, an archive, or even a prison of consciousness projecting subtle influences into the human mind. These are not questions answered easily. They live at the edges of science and speculation where fact and folklore blur. But they are questions worth asking, especially when the official story leaves gaps wide enough for mystery to seep through. Over the course of this journey, we will explore 9 chapters of lunar enigmas. We will revisit the Apollo missions and their unexplained moments. We will sift through scientific data that hints at structures, hollows, and metals that should not be there. We will step into the realm of myth where ancient peoples spoke of a time before the moon appeared in the sky. And we will follow modern nations as they send probes into its shadowed craters, returning with samples that raise more questions than they answer. This is not a tale of horror, nor a simple bedtime story. It is a documentary for sleep, where each detail unfolds slowly like pages of an ancient manuscript. As the moon hangs above us tonight, let us consider a possibility both audacious and strangely comforting. That we are not alone beneath its gaze, and that its pale light may be more than a reflection. It may be a signal waiting for us to listen. The Apollo program was designed to be a triumph of technology and ambition, a clear signal during the Cold War that the United States could achieve what no other nation had attempted. 6 successful landings between 1969 and 1972 turned the moon into a symbol of human capability. Yet beneath the polished narrative of progress, there remain details that resist explanation, details that continue to stir questions more than half a century later. One of the earliest anomalies appeared during Apollo 10, the dress rehearsal for the first landing. In May 1969, astronauts Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan brought their spacecraft into orbit around the moon. They tested the procedures for descent approaching the lunar surface without actually touching down. At one point, as the spacecraft slipped behind the far side of the moon, radio contact with Earth was cut off. This was expected, the moon itself blocked the signal, but what was not expected was the sound the astronauts reported. A long whistling tone filled their headsets, musical almost like a flute echoing in empty air. One of the astronauts described it in the transcript later released as outer space music. NASA's technical explanation was that signals from the command module and the lunar module interfered with one another. The astronauts, perhaps concerned about being ridiculed, debated quietly whether to even mention it once they returned. For decades, the recordings were locked away, resurfacing only when NASA declassified them in the 2000s. When listeners heard the tones, they seemed too structured, too deliberate to be dismissed as mere static. Just 2 months later, Apollo 11 carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the surface. The images are iconic, the first human footprints in lunar dust, the American flag planted in silent triumph. But the record is not without gaps. At one point during the most watched broadcast in history, the live transmission dropped into silence for 2 minutes. The official story is that it was a technical glitch, a minor failure in the relay. Yet some claim Armstrong switched to a secondary private channel to report something so unexpected that it could not be shared with the public. According to those accounts, Armstrong described objects near the rim of a crater, large luminous shapes aligned almost as if they were observing. These words do not appear in the transcripts released to the world, but the rumour has persisted, carried by those who say they heard fragments through unofficial channels. When Armstrong returned to Earth, his public demeanour was not one of a man basking in glory. His speeches were cautious, even cryptic, hinting at truths hidden by protective layers and discoveries waiting beyond our current reach. Buzz Aldrin, his companion on the mission, later acknowledged that they saw lights following their spacecraft on the way to the moon. In later interviews, he offered an explanation, perhaps sunlight reflecting off panels detached from the rocket. Yet his hesitation and the careful phrasing of his words leaves an impression of uncertainty. If it was debris, why did it appear to move with intention? Why was his first instinct to describe it as something unexplained? Apollo 12 added another strange detail. After completing their surface experiments, astronauts deliberately crashed the lunar module into the moon to test seismic instruments left behind. The result was unexpected. Instead of a short, dull tremor, the moon reverberated for nearly an hour like a bell, as one scientist described. Though not a sighting in the sky, the anomaly deepened suspicion that the moon might not behave like an ordinary planetary body. Apollo 13, the mission that never reached the surface, carried its own mysteries. Beyond the dramatic explosion that threatened the crew's lives, mission records mention unexplained flashes seen outside the spacecraft. NASA attributed them to debris or static discharge, but later commentators wondered if they were more than coincidence. By Apollo 14, astronaut Edgar Mitchell had begun to voice his own convictions. After walking on the moon, Mitchell became one of the most outspoken astronauts about extraterrestrial life. He insisted that contact with non-human intelligences was real, that governments knew more than they admitted, and that the moon itself might hold evidence hidden from the public. His statements were controversial, but his reputation as a scientist and pilot lent them weight. Gordon Cooper, a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs, though not an Apollo moonwalker, added his own testimony. He reported seeing unidentified flying objects during earlier missions, objects that maneuvered with intelligence unlike any known satellite or aircraft. In congressional hearings, he stood by his claims, arguing that the phenomena were real and that official channels were dismissing them without proper study. Taken individually, these reports could be brushed aside. Equipment malfunctions are common in the harsh environment of space. Astronauts endure stress isolation and sensory overload that could affect perception. Yet taken together, they create a pattern trained professionals entrusted with billions of dollars worth of technology, describing events that do not fit neatly within the expected framework. NASA, of course, has explanations for each case. The whistling space music from Apollo 10, they say, was simply overlapping signals. The blackout during Apollo 11 was a transmission glitch. The lights trailing Aldrin and Armstrong were pieces of hardware reflecting sunlight. Seismic reverberations from Apollo 12 are explained as the effect of dry, fractured rock, transmitting vibrations differently than Earth. In each case, there is a technical rationale. But why then do the doubts persist? Why do transcripts and recordings surface decades later, fueling speculation rather than settling it? Some point to the Cold War context, revealing anomalies might have risked weakening public confidence in NASA, undermining a program that symbolized American prestige. Others argue that the silence was motivated by fear of admitting that the moon, our nearest neighbor, might not be as empty as we believed. The astronauts themselves did not speak in tones of hysteria. If anything, their testimonies were subdued, often reluctant, as though weighed down by knowledge they could not fully share. When Armstrong hinted at hidden truths in his later speeches, when Aldrin carefully passed his words about lights in space, when Mitchell spoke openly of extraterrestrial presence, they did so with the reserve of men who knew the cost of saying too much. What are we to make of these fragments? a sound like music on the far side of the moon. 2 minutes of silence during humanity's first steps on another world. Lights that followed shadows, that lingered vibrations that echoed longer than stone should allow. Each incident on its own might be explained away, but together they form a chain of mystery that resists closure. Perhaps the answers are mundane and the moon is nothing more than rock and dust. Or perhaps in those brief and fragile moments when humans ventured farther than ever, before they brushed against something that was never meant to be revealed. The Apollo missions gave us triumph, but they also left us with questions. Questions that continue to echo like a bell struck long ago, still resonating through the silence of space. The Apollo missions are celebrated as one of humanity's greatest achievements. Yet almost as soon as the first broadcasts were shown, doubt began to creep in. For some, the grainy black and white images, the strange shadows and the absence of stars looked less like the surface of the moon and more like a carefully prepared stage. Over the years, this doubt grew into a body of theories, each questioning not just the details of Apollo, but the very reality of humankind's first steps beyond Earth. Perhaps the most influential voice among the skeptics was Bill Kaysing, a former employee of Rocketdyne, a company that built engines for NASA. Kaysing published a book in 1976 with a title as provocative as its contents, "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle." In it, he argued that the Apollo landings had been staged, filmed in a studio as part of a grand deception designed to secure American prestige during the Cold War. Kaysing's arguments have been repeated endlessly in the decades since. He pointed to the way the American flag seemed to ripple in still photographs, despite the lack of air on the moon. He noted that the shadows in the lunar images sometimes diverged as though more than one light source had been used. He questioned why no stars were visible in the background of Apollo photography, when the astronauts should have had an unobstructed view of the heavens. To him, these were not accidents or quirks of technology, but signs of deliberate staging. NASA and independent experts have responded to each of these claims. The flag, they explain, was equipped with a horizontal rod, and when astronauts twisted it into the lunar soil, its motion caused ripples that remained frozen in the fabric. The shadows that appear misaligned, they argue, are the result of uneven ground and perspective, not multiple light sources, and the absence of stars. The cameras were adjusted for the bright lunar surface, leaving the faint light of distant stars invisible on film. Each answer is simple, even convincing. Yet for many who encountered Kaysing's arguments, the impression of deception lingered. The idea that the moon landings were faked gained strength in the cultural atmosphere of the 1970s. The Vietnam War had eroded trust in government. The Watergate scandal revealed that leaders could and did conceal truths from the public. Against that backdrop, the notion that NASA might have staged a cosmic performance did not seem entirely impossible. If deception could occur on Earth, why not in space? Television specials, articles and documentaries revisited Kaysing's claims, spreading them to new generations. For some, the hoax theory became a lens through which to view not just Apollo, but the very relationship between citizens and their institutions. If the moon landings could be faked, then what else might be hidden? The skepticism was not limited to Kaysing. In the years that followed, other voices added new layers to the narrative. Some claim that Stanley Kubrick, the director of 2001: A Space Odyssey, had been secretly commissioned to film the Apollo landings on a soundstage, pointing to supposed clues hidden in his later film The Shining. Others suggested that the images of astronauts bounding across the surface were achieved with slow-motion photography and hidden wires. Still others moved beyond the idea of a hoax to suggest something even more unsettling, that the landings happened, but what the astronauts encountered could not be revealed. According to this view, the photographs and broadcasts we saw were edited versions carefully curated to conceal evidence of structures, artifacts, or even spacecraft already present on the lunar surface. The deception then was not about whether humanity reached the moon, but about what was found there. In the 2010s, the hoax theories gained unexpected momentum from the release of classified documents by Edward Snowden. While his leaks focused primarily on surveillance and intelligence programs, some researchers claimed to find references to extraterrestrial signals intercepted and monitored by agencies like the NSA. A few of those signals, they argued, seemed to originate from the direction of the moon. Although Snowden himself never publicly confirmed such details, the suggestion was enough to breathe new life into long-standing suspicions. At the same time, digital technology offered new ways to analyze old material. High-resolution scans of Apollo photographs revealed anomalies, glints, shapes, or geometric patterns that some interpreted as evidence of editing. NASA explained these as artifacts of film degradation or scanning errors, but in the age of the internet, images can acquire a life of their own. Shared, debated, and magnified on countless forums, each anomaly became another piece of circumstantial evidence in the courtroom of public opinion. The persistence of these theories raises a question: why do they endure even when official explanations seem adequate? One answer lies in psychology. The moon landings were extraordinary events. For some, it is easier to believe in deception than to accept that humans truly crossed the 250,000 miles of space and walked on another world with 1960s technology. The hoax theory, in a paradoxical way, makes the story more believable to them. It grounds the impossible in the familiar realm of human trickery. Another answer lies in trust, or rather the erosion of it. Each time a government conceals information, each time a scandal emerges, the ground beneath official narratives becomes less stable. Into that gap, alternative explanations find fertile soil. The moon, distant and mysterious, becomes the perfect canvas for suspicion. And yet these theories also serve another function. They keep the Apollo missions alive in the cultural imagination. While many people have forgotten the names of astronauts beyond Armstrong and Aldrin, the hoax debates continue to circulate widely. They ensure that the moon remains not just a chapter in history, but a living mystery, a topic of debate in classrooms, coffee shops, and late-night conversations. Were the landings staged? Did astronauts see more than they were allowed to reveal? Or are these theories simply mirrors of our own doubts, reflecting the difficulty of reconciling extraordinary achievement with ordinary human institutions? As we listen to these stories, the tone need not be one of accusation or ridicule. Instead, it can be one of curiosity. The doubts themselves are part of the history. They tell us not only about the moon, but about ourselves, about the tension between wonder and skepticism, between the desire to believe and the instinct to question. The Apollo program gave humanity images of courage and triumph, but it also left a shadow, a place where official explanations and unofficial suspicions continue to overlap. In that shadow, the hoax theories live on, not always convincing, but always compelling. They remind us that the moon is more than rock and dust. It is a screen onto which we project our hopes, our fears, and our need to know whether the stories we're told are the whole truth. The moon has been studied for centuries, and yet its true nature continues to puzzle scientists and theorists alike. On its surface, it seems like a simple satellite, a ball of rock scarred by impact circling Earth in a predictable orbit. But the deeper researchers have looked, the more they have found irregularities that resist straightforward explanation. These irregularities gave rise to one of the most audacious hypotheses ever proposed, that the moon may not be solid but hollow. The idea of a hollow moon is not a casual rumour. It emerged from serious scientific observations data collected by missions that remain some of the most carefully documented in history. Apollo 12 was the first turning point. After finishing their work on the surface in November 1969, astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean left behind instruments to monitor lunar activity. Before departing, they sent their empty lunar module crashing into the moon's surface, creating a controlled impact to test the seismometers. What happened next startled everyone. The seismic equipment recorded vibrations that lasted nearly an hour. Instead of a sharp, fading tremor, the moon reverberated, producing a resonant hum. One NASA scientist described it memorably: "The moon rang like a bell." The phrase captured the imagination of journalists and theorists, and it has echoed ever since. Apollo 13, though remembered for its near disaster, added another data point. The mission never landed, but the rocket's spent booster stage struck the moon with even greater force than Apollo 12's module. Again, the moon vibrated far longer than expected. Some instruments registered reverberations lasting over 3 hours. For geologists accustomed to the behavior of solid planetary bodies, the data was baffling. Mars asteroids and even Earth absorb impacts with dull thuds and short-lived vibrations. The Moon, by contrast, seemed to hum like a tuned instrument. NASA's official explanation focused on the Moon's geology. Unlike Earth, the Moon is dry. It lacks water and a molten core, so seismic energy is not dampened in the same way. The shock waves travel through fractured rock, bouncing back and forth, prolonging the effect. This reasoning satisfied some, but not all. The persistence, the clarity of the resonances, and the way they repeated across multiple impacts suggested something more unusual than dry geology. Questions about the Moon's density deepened the mystery. In the early 1960s, before Apollo, NASA scientist Gordon MacDonald noted that the Moon's average density was 3.3 grams per cubic centimetre, far lower than Earth's 5.5. He remarked that the data implied the Moon might not be a completely solid body. Later, lunar geophysicist Sean Solomon commented that the unusual seismic results seemed consistent with a tremendously fractured interior. But the hollow moon idea lingered because no simple model explained all the observations at once. The Apollo missions brought back more than seismic data. They also returned rocks nearly 400 kilograms of samples studied in laboratories around the world. Many findings were expected: basalt formed from ancient volcanic flows, minerals shaped by billions of years of cosmic bombardment. But some details stood out. Samples contained unusually high concentrations of titanium, rare on Earth, but common in aerospace engineering. Traces of uranium-236 and neptunium-237 were detected isotopes not naturally occurring in large amounts, but associated with nuclear processes. There was also mica and even hints of brass materials that on Earth are products of technology as much as geology. Each anomaly could in theory be explained. Cosmic rays can alter isotopes. Volcanic processes can concentrate unusual elements. Contamination is always a possibility. Yet when viewed together, they fueled suspicion that the Moon's interior might not be entirely natural. The boldest proposal came not from NASA, but from the Soviet Union. In 1970, two scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov, published an article in Sputnik magazine. Their question was simple yet radical. Could the Moon be the creation of alien intelligence? They suggested it might be a hollow spacecraft cloaked in rock to disguise its artificial nature, placed in orbit around Earth long ago. They pointed to the Moon's orbital stability, its unusual density, its resonant ringing and its crust, which is thicker on the far side than the near side, as if designed to protect against impacts. The Western scientific community dismissed the article as speculation. The dominant explanation for the Moon's origin was the giant impact hypothesis, which holds that a Mars-sized body struck the early Earth, ejecting debris that coalesced into the Moon. The theory accounts for many observations, including the Moon's composition, which closely matches Earth's crust. Yet even within that framework, anomalies remain. Why does the Moon's orbit remain so unusually stable? Why is its face locked toward Earth with such precision? Why does its density seem too low, as though material is missing from within? Beyond scientific models, the physical evidence on the surface added further intrigue. Many craters on the Moon, regardless of their diameter, have surprisingly uniform depths. On Earth, impacts create deeper scars depending on size and force. On the Moon, even large craters often reach a limit and then stop, as though an impenetrable layer lies beneath. Some researchers speculated about a dense inner shell, perhaps metallic, hidden under the regolith. Apollo astronauts experienced unexpected resistance while drilling into the lunar soil. Their tools designed to bore easily through dust and rock, sometimes met with obstacles described as harder than expected, almost as if they had struck reinforced material. The reports are sparse, the details incomplete, but they remain part of the puzzle. Later missions from other nations added new layers. Japan's Kaguya probe in 2007 mapped the Moon in unprecedented detail, revealing gravitational anomalies known as mascons, mass concentrations beneath the surface. NASA had detected them decades earlier, but their true nature is still debated. Mainstream scientists view them as remnants of asteroid impacts that left denser material embedded in the crust. Alternative thinkers suggest they could be engineered stabilizers deliberately placed to keep the moon in its precise orbit. China's Chang'e missions returned samples that included unusual crystalline structures described in official reports as volcanic glass. Still, their composition and formation raise questions. Could they represent byproducts of processes not yet understood, or remnants of something manufactured long ago? If the moon were hollow, what purpose would it serve? Theories vary. Some imagine it as a surveillance station monitoring Earth with instruments hidden deep inside. Others envision it as a storage vault, an ark containing knowledge artifacts or even genetic material from civilizations long vanished. A more speculative view holds that it is a machine still functioning subtly, regulating Earth's environment, its tides, its climate, perhaps even aspects of human consciousness. Philosophers and mystics have added symbolic weight to these speculations. In many traditions, the moon is associated with reflection illusion and hidden truths. The idea that it might be hollow resonates with metaphors of emptiness and resonance. A bell is hollow, yet its emptiness allows it to carry sound. Could the moon's hollowness, literal or figurative, be the reason it carries such weight in our imagination? Skeptics argue that natural explanations suffice. Seismic ringing may result from dry, rigid geology. Unusual isotopes may come from cosmic processes. Orbital stability may be the product of billions of years of gravitational interaction. To them, the hollow moon is an unnecessary leap. And yet the persistence of the hypothesis reveals something important. The data is not entirely settled. There are gaps, places where models fail to replicate observations, questions that linger despite decades of study. Perhaps the moon is not hollow, but complex in ways we have yet to fully understand. Or perhaps the anomalies hint at something more. In either case, the questions remain compelling. Why does the moon hum when struck? Why does it contain isotopes that should not be there? Why do its craters resist deeper penetration as if shielding a hidden layer? The hollow moon hypothesis may never be proven, but it continues to echo much like the vibrations recorded by Apollo seismometers, resonating through decades of debate. Each new mission brings more data, yet the mystery endures. The moon. It seems refuses to be reduced to a simple story. Whether hollow-engineered or simply misunderstood, it remains a riddle in orbit circling Earth with silent patience, reflecting light while concealing whatever lies within. As we look up at its pale glow, we are left to wonder, is the moon merely rock and dust, or is it something far more extraordinary, a bell in the sky waiting for us to hear its true tone? The scientific puzzles of the moon, the seismic echoes, the isotopes, the craters that seem too shallow, already stretch our imagination. Yet for many, those anomalies are only the beginning. Around the moon has grown a forest of stories, each suggesting that it is not merely a passive satellite, but an active place, a stage for powers beyond human reach. These theories are often called fringe, even fantastic. Still, they persist, filling the spaces left open by uncertainty. One place to begin is with the astronauts themselves. They were, after all, the only humans to travel to the moon. Their words carry a weight that no theorist on Earth can match. Buzz Aldrin. The second man on the lunar surface admitted that he and Armstrong observed lights during Apollo 11's journey. The official explanation that these lights were reflections from detached panels came later. In the earliest accounts, Aldrin described them simply as objects moving in ways that felt intentional. His careful tone left many wondering whether even he was convinced by the mundane explanation. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon during Apollo 14, went further. After retiring from NASA, he spoke openly about his conviction that extraterrestrial visitations were real. He claimed to have encountered credible evidence that governments were withholding knowledge of non-human craft. For him, the moon was not an empty rock, but a place that might contain artifacts, or even bases hidden from public view. Gordon Cooper, though he never travelled to the moon, testified before Congress. about unidentified flying objects he'd seen during earlier missions. He described objects that moved with purpose craft that no human technology of the 1960s could replicate. To Cooper, these were not errors of perception, but real encounters. The accounts vary in detail, but they share a thread-trained observers, disciplined professionals describing events they could not explain. Critics argue that stress fatigue or misperception can shape such experiences. Yet the persistence of these testimonies fuels the idea that the moon is not only strange in its geology, but in its role as a meeting place between humanity and something other. Out of these suspicions grew the notion of hidden activity on the moon. Some claim that vast chambers beneath its crust serve as bases for advanced civilizations. In the 1970s and 1980s, when the Cold War fueled secret research, the American intelligence community sponsored unusual programs, among them the Stargate Project, an attempt to test psychic phenomena such as remote viewing. One of the most famous participants Ingo Swann described projecting his perception to the moon. His accounts, preserved in declassified documents, tell of domes, tunnels, and lights. He even claimed to see humanoid figures working under artificial illumination. To skeptics, these visions were fantasies shaped by suggestion and imagination, but supporters note that Swann sometimes described real Earth-based targets with startling accuracy. If his remote views of the moon were equally valid, what did he actually glimpse? Stories like Swann's tie into a broader pattern, the moon as a hub of activity hidden just out of sight. Amateur astronomers have long reported transient lunar phenomena, brief flashes, glows, or mists appearing on the surface. Over 4 centuries, thousands of such observations have been catalogued. Most can be explained by impacts or outgassing. But for those inclined toward other interpretations, they look like signals, entrances, or movements of machines beneath the surface. The idea that the moon serves as a base leads naturally to speculation about who might be using it. In the late 20th century, British writer David Icke introduced his moon matrix hypothesis. He argued that the moon is not natural at all, but a constructed station operated by reptilian beings. According to Icke, these entities project frequencies from the moon that shape human perception, locking humanity into cycles of fear and control. The theory is extraordinary, often ridiculed by mainstream commentators, yet its imagery resonates in subtle ways. The idea of hidden powers controlling thought through unseen waves mirrors modern anxieties about surveillance media and technology. In this sense, the moon becomes not only an astronomical body, but a metaphor, a shining object in the sky that dictates what we see and how we think. Long before Icke, older traditions had already spoken of such forces. In the Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, the archons are described as rulers of illusion beings who keep souls bound to the material world. Some modern interpreters suggest that the moon itself, luminous yet deceptive, was seen as one of their tools. The archons were not necessarily physical creatures, but influences shaping perception, feeding on ignorance. To imagine the moon as part of their system is to extend ancient metaphor into the space age. Other myths echo this theme. In southern Africa, Zulu lore tells of the Chitauri reptilian beings who brought the moon to Earth as part of their domination. The shaman Credo Mutwa described it as a hollow vessel, towed across the sky by star beings. Once in place, it altered tides, weather, and human consciousness. The story passed down orally finds curious parallels with modern hollow moon theories, though it predates the Apollo program by generations. In Mesoamerican traditions, the moon is sometimes linked with control and deception. Among the Maya, the goddess Ixchel was both a healer and a bringer of illusions. In Aztec stories, the moon was created when a lesser god sacrificed himself into fire, becoming a dim light compared to the blazing sun. These myths, though symbolic, often describe the moon as something imposed artificial or regulating. When these strands, astronaut accounts, remote viewing, reptilian theories, Gnostic texts and indigenous myths are woven together, they form a tapestry of speculation. The details differ, but the theme repeats: the moon is not merely passive. It is active, inhabited, or engineered, serving as a point of contact or control. Skeptics remind us that no hard evidence supports these claims. Telescopes and probes have not confirmed domes bases or reptilian overseers. Remote viewing remains unproven. Myths reflect human imagination as much as cosmic truth, and yet the persistence of the stories cannot be ignored. They survive not because they are verified, but because they resonate. They speak to human concerns about power control and the unknown. What makes these theories compelling is not only the possibility of aliens, but the way they mirror our own world. To imagine reptilians broadcasting control from the moon is in a sense to dramatize our fear of manipulation from governments, corporations, or unseen networks. To picture archons weaving illusions aligns with our sense that media shapes our perception. To think of the moon as a machine is to externalize the unease of living under constant surveillance. Perhaps this is why the moon has become such fertile ground for these ideas. It is close enough to be familiar, yet distant enough to be mysterious. It looks down on us every night, unwavering silent. It feels watchful. And so we imagine that it is. Could any of these theories be true? Could there be domes beneath the dust tunnels cut into ancient rock, or signals humming faintly from the far side? Or are these merely reflections of our own stories projected onto the canvas of the moon's face? As we lie beneath its pale glow, the question itself becomes part of the experience. The moon is there, full and round, inviting wonder. Whether or not it hides civilizations or frequencies, it certainly hides something our own deepest questions mirrored back at us. In the end, the theories about reptilians, archons, and alien bases may tell us as much about humanity as they do about the moon. They show our hunger to explain anomalies, our fear of control, our need to imagine watchers in the sky. They also reveal our creativity, the way we weave science, myth, and speculation into a narrative that makes the night less empty. The moon perhaps is not a machine watching us. Perhaps it is we who are watching ourselves using its light as a mirror. And in that reflection, every culture, every generation sees something different. Gods, monsters, engineers, or lizards. Whatever the truth, the moon remains constant, silent in its orbit. And we remain here looking up, wondering what lies within and beyond. The moon is silent. It has no air, no seas, no life of its own. And yet, for as long as humans have looked upward, it has shaped the rhythms of our planet and the patterns of our lives. Its influence is at once physical, biological, cultural, and psychological. To understand humanity without the moon would be impossible. The most direct and measurable influence is on the oceans. The gravitational pull of the moon reaches across the 250,000 miles that separate us, drawing Earth's waters upward. Twice each day the seas rise and fall. Fishermen for centuries have relied on the tides, planning their voyages according to the pull of the moon. Entire ecosystems are built on this cycle. On the mudflats, shellfish feed as the tide flows in. When the water recedes, birds arrive to hunt. Without this constant rhythm, coastlines would look entirely different. Spring tides occurring when the Earth, Sun and Moon align at new and full phases bring the greatest surges. Neap tides during the first and third quarters are weaker, more restrained. Even far inland rivers and estuaries breathe with this pull, their currents swelling and subsiding with the moon's orbit. The daily rise and fall is so regular that ancient navigators used the tides as a clock measuring time by the sea's heartbeat. Marine life is attuned to these signals in ways we're only beginning to grasp. Coral reefs, some of the oldest structures on Earth, release their eggs in synchrony with the full moon. In the South Pacific, millions of corals spawn within a window of a few hours, guided not by chance but by lunar timing. Crabs in the Caribbean crawl ashore en masse when the tides and the moon align, their migration a spectacle of instinct perfected over millennia. Sea turtles return to beaches where they themselves hatch digging nests by moonlight. Hatchlings emerge at night, scurrying toward the brightest horizon, the reflection of the moon on the waves. Even the smallest creatures follow lunar rhythms. Plankton in the open ocean rise toward the surface during certain phases, then sink again, their movements synchronized with the pull of the moon. For them, the moon is a distant metronome beating silently above, yet guiding their ascent and descent in the water column. On land, human beings have always felt the moon's presence. The menstrual cycle, averaging 28 days, mirrors the lunar month of 29.5 days. In ancient societies, this alignment was seen as sacred. Among the First Nations of North America, women sometimes withdrew to moon lodges during their cycles, resting and reflecting together, honouring their connection to the sky. In traditional Chinese medicine, the moon is tied to fertility and renewal, a cosmic clock marking the balance of yin and yang. Even today, researchers have observed that many cycles without external cues still fall into harmony with the lunar calendar, as if the body remembers the rhythm engraved over countless generations. The influence extends into sleep. Modern studies in Switzerland, Germany, and the United States have recorded measurable changes in sleep patterns around the full moon. Participants fell asleep later, slept less deeply, and experienced shorter cycles of rest. Levels of melatonin, the hormone that governs sleep, dipped. Remarkably, these effects appeared even in controlled laboratory conditions where subjects were shielded from moonlight. Something perhaps subtle, gravitational or electromagnetic cues seemed to touch their internal clocks. Folklore anticipated these findings centuries ago. The word lunacy itself comes from Luna, the Roman goddess of the moon. Medieval physicians believed that the full moon could provoke seizures, fevers, or fits of madness. Records from hospitals and prisons suggested that behaviour grew more erratic on nights of lunar brightness. Police officers in modern cities often note that their busiest shifts come during full moons. While statistical studies offer mixed results, the persistence of the belief is striking. From wolves howling to humans quarrelling, the full moon is seen as a catalyst of unrest. Legends gave this unrest a face. In Europe, werewolves were said to transform beneath the moon's glow, embodying the fear that humanity harbours a hidden beast. In Africa, tales told of hyena men who roamed by moonlight. In Asia, spirits were believed to wander most freely during full moons, when boundaries between worlds grew thin. These myths, though, diverse circle back to a common idea that the moon stirs what lies dormant, awakening forces within and without. But alongside chaos, the moon also brings order. Farmers in Mesopotamia, China, and the Americas planted and harvested by lunar calendars. The waxing moon was considered auspicious for sowing, the waning for reaping. Biodynamic farming, a modern revival of these traditions, suggests that plants may indeed respond to lunar cycles. Sap flows, germination rates, and even pest behaviour show patterns that align with the moon. Animals on land use the moon for navigation. Birds crossing oceans fly at night, orienting themselves by the lunar glow. Moths drawn to the moon sometimes mistake artificial lights for its beacon. Even salmon and eels appear to time their migrations to lunar cycles, responding to the interplay of light, gravity, and instinct. The moon, without voice or motion, guides journeys that span continents. Culturally, the moon has been a clock and a compass. Ancient calendars were lunar long before they were solar. The Babylonians counted months by the moon's phases. In Egypt, festivals of Isis were aligned with its cycles. In China, the Mid-Autumn Festival celebrates the harvest moon with poetry and lanterns. Among the Maya lunar eclipses were moments of awe, signalling shifts in cosmic balance. Across the world, lunar phases shaped rituals, marriages, wars, and feasts. The moon was not just an object in the sky, it was time itself divided into crescents and circles. Philosophers and mystics extended this symbolism further. In India, the moon or Chandra is linked with the mind, waxing and waning as thoughts do. In Greece, Selene and Artemis embodied light and renewal, while Hecate represented the moon's darker hidden face. In alchemy, silver was the moon's metal, reflective and mutable. Poets from Sappho to Shakespeare invoke the moon as muse and mirror. Painters cast lovers beneath its glow, and composers wrote nocturnes to capture its quiet pull. Science and art converge in recognizing that the moon regulates cycles of tides of fertility, of mood, of creativity. It is at once external and internal, cosmic and personal. Still, questions remain. How exactly does the moon disturb sleep in windowless rooms? Why do some animals synchronize with its cycle more closely than others? Could there be electromagnetic effects we have yet to measure? Some speculative writers suggest that the moon functions almost like a transmitter, sending subtle frequencies that shape consciousness. Mainstream science does not endorse this view, but the metaphor remains powerful. It frames the moon as not merely a reflector of sunlight, but as a regulator of human experience, a clock not only of oceans and crops, but of thought itself. In this view, the moon is both natural and symbolic. It is a satellite of rock, yet also a conductor of rhythms, a quiet companion that dictates the tempo of life. Without it, Earth would tilt more chaotically. Seasons would waver, tides would weaken. Perhaps life itself would have taken another path. With it, our world is steadied, ordered, and haunted by cycles of light and shadow. Tonight, as the moon rises, corals will release their spawn, turtles will crawl ashore, wolves will lift their voices, and countless people will glance upward, sensing something familiar yet strange. Some will find it calming, others unsettling. Some will sleep deeply, others restlessly. Each response is part of the larger pattern. The moon's influence is not a single force, but a chorus weaving through waterland, body and mind. It has shaped our past and continues to guide our present, and whether by gravity, light or myth, it will continue to mark our nights long into the future. The moon may or may not conceal hidden machinery, but it does not need to. Its power is already immense. It is written into tides, into blood, into dreams. It watches, it guides, it unsettles, and it inspires. To live beneath it is to live in rhythm with a force older than humanity itself. The moon has always been more than a distant light in the sky. Long before telescopes or seismometers, long before Apollo or satellites, humanity looked upward and wove stories. These stories are fragments of memory, imagination, and meaning. For ancient peoples, the moon was not a rock but a presence, sometimes a god, sometimes a guide, sometimes a mystery whose origins needed explanation. One of the most striking traditions comes from southern Africa. Among the Zulu, there is a story that the earth was once without the moon. The world was darker, the nights deeper, and life unfolded in rhythms unlike our own. Then the tale says 2 brothers, creatures of immense power, brought the moon to earth. They rolled it across the heavens like a great egg, placing it in orbit to watch over humanity. With its arrival came tides, seasons, and the changes of life. But the story carries a shadow. These brothers were not benefactors, but manipulators. The moon in this telling is not a gift, but a tool of control, a way to regulate Earth and its inhabitants. In Greece, the moon was personified as Selene, the shining goddess, who drove her silver chariot across the night sky. She was radiant, constant, her beauty celebrated in hymns and poetry. Yet Greek mythology also spoke of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and protector of the wilderness, often linked with the moon's phases. And in darker tales, Hecate appeared the goddess of crossroads and shadows associated with the moon's hidden side. These multiple faces reflected the moon itself, sometimes bright, sometimes obscure, always changing. To the Greeks, the moon was divine, a living presence that shifted in form and meaning. Further east in Mesopotamia, the moon god Nana, also called Sin, was one of the most important deities. His cycles ordered the calendar, his crescents marked time for rituals and agriculture. Temples to Nana stood in Ur and Haran cities that flourished under his gaze. Priests studied the moon's phases with meticulous care, recording eclipses and alignments. For them, the moon was a clock of destiny. Its movements foretold the rise of kings, the outcomes of battles, and the balance of the cosmos. The Sumerians carried a legend of a time before the moon existed. In their myths, the gods shaped the heavens, and the moon was placed deliberately, a crafted order imposed upon the chaos of early creation. The fact that such stories exist in Sumer, in Zulu tradition, in other cultures, suggests that humanity often imagined the moon as an arrival, not a natural companion. It was something introduced, something that had not always been there. In the highlands of South America, the Chibcha people of Colombia told of Chia, a goddess of the moon. She was radiant, but also dangerous, capable of bringing floods and calamities if dishonoured. Her temples were built near lakes where priests offered sacrifices to maintain harmony. To the Chibcha, the moon was both life-giver and potential destroyer. embodying the dual nature of the sky's power. The Maya of Central America, skilled astronomers and timekeepers, wove the moon into their calendars with precision. Their lunar goddess Ixchel presided over childbirth, healing and weaving. She was a patron of women and of cycles, her waxing and waning linked to fertility. Temples on Cozumel Island were dedicated to her drawing pilgrims who sought blessings. The Maya tracked eclipses and used the moon's phases to guide rituals, seeing in its rhythm a reflection of life and death. In Egypt, the moon was associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. He measured time, kept order, and balanced the cosmos. The lunar calendar guided festivals and planting. When the moon waned, Egyptians feared disorder, and when it waxed again, they saw renewal. For them, the moon was a record keeper, a cosmic scribe as well as a divine presence. These myths vary in detail, but together they form a pattern. Across continents, people sensed that the moon was not simply a background object. They imagined it as a deity, a newcomer, a regulator, or a mirror of human fate. In many stories, it had not always been present. Its arrival marked a shift, an ordering of chaos, or a change in the balance of life. The recurrence of before the moon myths is especially intriguing. Could they be echoes of cultural memory, perhaps drawn from times when the moon's orbit was different, or when eclipses seemed to mark new beginnings? Or are they metaphors for the way the moon transforms the night, introducing light where there was once only darkness? For ancient societies, the moon was also a marker of time. Lunar calendars emerged in China, in Babylon, in the Americas. Months were counted not by the sun but by the moon cycle. Festivals rose and fell with its phases. In many cultures, the full moon was a time of gathering ritual and celebration. Its light brought safety to the dark. Its absence marked times of caution. To live by the moon was to live in rhythm with a visible changing clock in the sky. Even the arrangement of monuments hints at lunar reverence. At Stonehenge in England, the alignment of stones marks not only solar solstices, but also major lunar standstills. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor reflect celestial patterns, some aligning with lunar cycles. In New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans carved petroglyphs of crescents and eclipses, capturing in stone the moon's power. These structures suggest that civilizations not only watched the moon, but built their lives, their rituals, and their cities in response to it. What we see in these stories is a consistent theme: the moon as more than natural. Whether goddess, trickster, newcomer, or regulator, it was always imbued with intention. It watched, it influenced, it decided. People felt that it had agency, that it was not passive but active. Today we describe the moon in terms of gravity, mass, and orbit. But the myths remind us that it was once described in terms of love, wrath, wisdom, and control. In the quiet of the night, when its glow falls over fields and oceans, those older meanings still stir. The moon may be rock and dust, but it is also story and symbol. Could these myths preserve more than imagination? Could the tales of a time before the moon echo some lost chapter of Earth's history? Or are they simply human ways of explaining the extraordinary regularity of a light that rises and sets with precision? The answers remain elusive. Yet, as with all lunar mysteries, the questions themselves continue to resonate. From Zulu shamans to Sumerian priests, from Chibcha storytellers to Greek poets, the moon has been at once familiar and strange. It is the same moon we see today, yet each culture has cast upon it a different face. Perhaps this is the greatest truth of all: the moon reflects not only sunlight, but also human imagination, glowing with the myths of countless generations. Long before telescopes, long before astronauts left footprints in lunar dust, humanity told stories about the moon. These stories did not see it as a ball of rock circling Earth, but as a living presence, a goddess, a god, a traveller, a newcomer, or even a regulator of fate. The myths vary across continents, but they share a common theme. The moon was never ordinary. It was always more. Among the Zulu of southern Africa, there is a tale that Earth once had no moon. Nights were darker, skies emptier. Then two brothers, beings of immense power, brought the moon across the heavens and placed it in orbit. With it came the tides, the seasons, and new rhythms of life. In this telling, the moon is not a natural companion but an imposed one introduced to shape and control. It is a regulator, not a gift. The Zulu story lingers with a sense of caution, as though the moon's arrival marked both a beginning and a loss. In ancient Greece, the moon took several forms. Selene, the radiant goddess, drove her silver chariot across the sky each night. She was beautiful and constant, admired in hymns and poems. Yet Selene also loved the mortal Endymion. In one myth, she asked Zeus to grant him eternal sleep, so that she might gaze upon him forever unchanging as she passed above. The story blends romance with stillness, reflecting the moon's serene watchfulness. The Greeks also honoured Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and wilderness often linked with the waxing and waning phases. Artemis represented independence, vitality, and the untamed forest. In contrast, Hecate embodied the moon's shadowed face. She was goddess of crossroads and sorcery invoked at night with offerings left at thresholds. Together, Selene, Artemis, and Hecate formed a trinity light, life, and shadow. The Greeks saw in the moon a cycle of faces, each reflecting a different truth about the night. In Mesopotamia, the moon was Nana, also called Sin. He was one of the oldest and most powerful deities, father of the sun god Shamash and the goddess Inanna. His temples in Ur and Haran stood as centres of worship and astronomy. Priests recorded the moon's movements with precision-keeping tablets that charted eclipses and phases. For them, the moon was both god and clock its cycles woven into the fate of kings and empires. When eclipses darkened its face, they read omens of danger, sometimes replacing rulers to shield the throne from ill fortune. Sumerian myths also hint at a time before the moon. In some versions of creation, the heavens were shaped and ordered by the gods, with the moon placed deliberately into its course. It was not assumed to have always been there. It was assigned, stationed, given a purpose. The idea resonates strangely with later myths suggesting that humanity across cultures imagined the moon as an arrival, not a primordial companion. The Chibcha people of Colombia told of Chia, the goddess of the moon. She was luminous, but also feared. When dishonoured, she could send floods to devastate the land. Temples were built near lakes where offerings were made to maintain her favour. In her dual nature, Chia resembled many lunar deities, nurturing yet dangerous, guiding yet unpredictable. Across the ocean, the Maya of Central America wove the moon into their intricate calendars. They revered Ixchel, goddess of childbirth, healing and weaving. She presided over fertility and renewal, her phases guiding rituals of life and death. Temples dedicated to her stood on Cozumel Island, attracting pilgrims who sought blessings for families and harvests. The Maya observed lunar eclipses with awe, recording them in codices as signs of cosmic shifts. For them, the moon was both a healer and a reminder of mortality. Among the Aztecs, the moon's origin was explained through sacrifice. In one myth, two gods prepared to leap into a great fire to become the sun and the moon. One Nanahuatzin, humble and blemished, sacrificed himself bravely and became the sun. The other hesitated, then followed, becoming the moon, bright but dim a secondary, a reminder of hesitation. To the Aztecs, the moon was always compared to the sun, its light a reflection of second place. Yet it remained central to ritual, its phases marking festivals and wars. Egypt too honoured the moon. Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing and measurement, was linked to lunar cycles. He balanced the sun's power, recorded time, and ensured order in the cosmos. Another Egyptian deity, Khonsu, whose name means the traveller, embodied the moon's nightly journey. His image, often shown with a sidelock of youth and a lunar disk, represented both healing and passage. Egyptians measured months by the moon, aligning festivals with its cycles. When the moon waned, they feared disorder. When it waxed, they celebrated renewal. In China, the moon became the home of Chang'e, a woman who drank an elixir of immortality and floated into the sky. There she remained accompanied by a jade rabbit that forever pounds herbs with a mortar. Each mid-autumn festival, families gather to honour her eating mooncakes beneath the full glow. The festival is not only celebration but remembrance the moon, as connection between past and present Earth, and sky family and eternity. Japan told of Tsukuyomi, a moon god born from the creator deity Izanagi. Unlike many cultures where the moon is female, in Japan it was male. Tsukuyomi quarrelled with his sister, the sun goddess Amaterasu, after killing the goddess of food. From that moment the sun and moon were separated, explaining why day and night do not share the sky. Across cultures, lunar myths carried recurring themes. The moon was often female, tied to fertility cycles and mystery. Yet it was sometimes male, a rival or counterpart to the sun. It was often imagined as arriving not eternal, placed into the sky by gods or beings of power. It was almost always connected to fate time and the hidden forces that guide life. Monuments built by ancient peoples reflect the same reverence. Stonehenge in England is often linked to the solstices, but its stones also align with the major lunar standstill, a cycle of 18.6 years, when the moon reaches extreme points in its orbit. This suggests that its builders tracked not only the sun, but also the moon with extraordinary care. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor include alignments with lunar events, reflecting the Khmer belief that celestial rhythms governed earthly order. In the Americas, the Maya constructed observatories like El Caracol at Chichen Itza, whose windows framed the rising and setting of the moon. In the Andes, Incan structures at Machu Picchu, aligned with both solar and lunar cycles linking architecture with the heavens. Petroglyphs carved by ancestral Puebloans in the American Southwest show crescents, full disks and eclipses recording celestial events in stone. One carving at Chaco Canyon is thought to depict a solar eclipse with a crescent moon beside it, marking not just an observation but a cultural memory of a cosmic drama. Philosophers and poets continued where priests and shamans left off. In India, Chandra was both a god and a planet, embodying the mind, emotions and beauty. In Greek philosophy, the moon became a bridge between earth and the heavens, the closest celestial body half divine and half mortal. Poets like Sappho praised its light. Shakespeare compared it to love's uncertainty, Shelley to the loneliness of change. Painters cast its glow on lovers, while musicians wrote nocturnes to capture its melancholy. All these myths and works remind us that the moon was never only physical, it was also symbolic. It reflected not only sunlight but human imagination. It was a goddess, a clock, a mirror, a regulator, a trickster. It was an explanation for madness, a guide for planting a marker of destiny and a source of beauty. Could these stories hold fragments of truth? The Zulu tale of a time before the moon, the Sumerian belief that it was placed deliberately, the Egyptian fear of its waning, all suggest that people across cultures sensed its strangeness. Perhaps they were only metaphors for the way the moon transforms the night, or perhaps they preserve faint echoes of events we have forgotten. Whether literal or symbolic, the myths speak with one voice: the moon is not ordinary. It has always been charged with meaning. For thousands of years it has been a canvas for human thought, shaping our calendars, our rituals and our dreams. Tonight, as we watch its pale glow, we are looking at the same light that guided the Zulu storytellers, the Sumerian priests, the Greek poets, and the Maya astronomers. The myths remain layered into its surface like invisible craters, reminding us that the moon is as much a story as it is a satellite. The moon, long the subject of myth and poetry, entered a new chapter in the 20th century. For the first time in history, nations had the technology to reach it not only with their eyes, but with machines and human footsteps. The Cold War made the moon more than a celestial neighbour. It became a stage on which two superpowers displayed ambition, pride, and technological mastery. Yet even in this era of rockets and computers, mystery clung to the moon. For every photograph released, there were questions about what had not been shown. For every mission announced, there were suspicions of secrets withheld. The first great contest was between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1959, the Soviets stunned the world by sending Luna 2, the first human-made object to impact the lunar surface. That same year, Luna 3 flew behind the moon and returned the first photographs of its far side. The images were grainy, but they revealed something astonishing. The far side looked completely different from the face familiar to us. Smooth plains dominated the near side, while the far side was crowded with craters. Scientists struggled to explain the asymmetry. Some speculated about hidden processes, others about differences in crust thickness. To the public, it was simply uncanny. Throughout the 1960s, the Soviets and Americans pushed farther. The Soviets achieved the first robotic landing with Luna 9 in 1966. The United States answered with Surveyor missions that tested soft landings, paving the way for Apollo. Each success carried a political weight. A footprint in lunar dust was not just science. It was strategy, proof of superiority in the Cold War's silent battle. When Apollo 11 reached the surface in 1969, the United States claimed victory. But the Soviets did not stop. Luna 16, 20 and 24 returned samples of lunar soil in the 1970s. Their robotic landers, though less dramatic than astronauts, quietly collected data that remains valuable today. Yet after the Apollo era, a strange silence fell. The United States abandoned plans for permanent lunar bases. The Soviets shifted attention to space stations. By the 1980s, the moon seemed forgotten, as if humanity had lost interest in its nearest neighbour. For some, this was puzzling. Why step onto another world only to retreat? Why return rocks and data only to place them in archives rarely revisited? Out of this silence grew suspicion. Some argued that more had been found than revealed. Were structures photographed and then erased from images? Did astronauts encounter phenomena too unsettling to share? NASA denied such claims, but the gap between what was promised and what was pursued left space for imagination. In the 21st century, interest returned this time not as a duel between two powers, but as a global race involving many nations. China entered the stage with its Chang'e program named after the lunar goddess. Chang'e 3 landed in 2013, delivering the rover U2. It moved slowly across the surface, photographing rocks and sending back streams of data. In 2019, Chang'e 4 achieved the first landing on the far side of the moon in the South Pole Aitken Basin. No human eye had seen that ground directly before. The choice of site raised questions: why there? Some speculated about unusual materials, others about the strategic importance of a region shielded from Earth's radio noise. Russia, inheritor of the Soviet legacy, announced renewed plans for lunar missions. Though many faced delays, the vision remained robotic. Landers followed, perhaps by cosmonauts re-establishing presence on the moon. India also joined, sending Chandrayaan missions to orbit and land. Chandrayaan 1 in 2008 confirmed the presence of water molecules in lunar soil, a finding that changed how scientists imagined the moon's resources. Chandrayaan 3 in 2023 achieved a soft landing near the South Pole, a region of special interest because of its permanently shadowed craters where ice may survive. The United States, after decades of pause, returned through the Artemis program. Named after Apollo's sister Artemis, aims not only to revisit the moon, but to establish a sustained presence. Plans include building a station in lunar orbit, the Gateway, and eventually creating a base near the South Pole. For NASA, this is framed as science and exploration. For observers, it is also strategy, a way to secure resources, position technology, and claim advantage in the new era of space competition. Why the South Pole? Because in those shadowed craters, sunlight never reaches. Temperatures plunge to hundreds of degrees below zero. And yet in that eternal night, water ice may lie preserved untouched for billions of years. Ice can be more than drinking water. It can be split into hydrogen and oxygen rocket fuel. Whoever controls lunar ice may control the gateway to deeper space. With these stakes, suspicion rises again. Some ask whether governments are truly transparent about what their missions find. High-resolution photographs have revealed odd shapes, rectilinear shadows, glints that seem metallic. NASA and other agencies attribute these to natural formations, tricks of light, or digital artifacts. Yet enthusiasts pore over every image searching for signs of artificial structures. For them, the moon is not simply geology, but archaeology, a site where evidence of earlier civilizations might wait. The political context deepens the intrigue. As nations compete, secrecy increases. Scientific data is released but often selectively in fragments through official reports. The rest remains in archives unseen by the public. In this environment, every gap becomes a mystery, every delay a possible cover-up. Private companies have entered as well. Firms in the United States, Japan and elsewhere are developing landers and rovers, some to deliver instruments, others to scout for resources. The moon has become not only a stage for national pride, but a frontier for commercial ambition. The vision of mining lunar regolith for helium-3, a potential fuel for fusion or harvesting metals, for industry drives proposals. Whether these are practical or speculative, they reinforce the sense that the moon holds more than dust and craters. Meanwhile, the public continues to wonder, why does the far side look so different? Why do some craters have strange uniform depths? Why did the Apollo missions end so abruptly? And why are nations now returning with such urgency? For many, the official answers are not enough. They turn to alternative explanations, hidden discoveries, secret bases or ancient artifacts uncovered and concealed. Science offers grounded responses, crustal differences explain the far side, engineering limits ended Apollo, resources drive Artemis. Yet the aura of mystery remains because the moon has always been both object and symbol. Every mission carries not only instruments but also the weight of centuries of stories. What we can say is this: the modern race to the moon is real. Nations are investing billions. Rovers crawl probes, orbit astronauts prepare. At the same time, the shadow of secrecy persists. Some images are unclear, some data incomplete, some missions delayed without explanation. Into that space, imagination flows as it always has. The moon today is what it has always been, a mirror. In ancient times, it reflected gods and myths. In the Cold War, it reflected pride and rivalry. In our era, it reflects ambition, suspicion, and the dream of expansion beyond Earth. It is still the nearest frontier, the closest stepping stone to the stars. Whether it conceals structures or only mysteries of geology, the moon remains a prize. Its ice, its minerals, its orbit all invite competition. And beneath that competition lies the same wonder that inspired myths of Selene and Chia Chang'e and Nana. The modern race does not end the mystery, it deepens it. For every sample analysed, another question arises. For every crater mapped, another shadow remains. The moon in the 21st century is at once a target of science, a theatre of politics and a canvas of imagination. As we look up tonight, its pale light hides the machinery of rockets and the calculations of engineers. It hides also, perhaps, whatever secrets remain unspoken. And so the question endures as it has for thousands of years: what truly waits on the moon? The moon has followed us through every age. It hovered above the first storytellers who imagined gods and monsters in its glow. It shone over the astronomers of Mesopotamia as they etched its cycles into clay. It guided sailors across oceans, farmers across fields, lovers across centuries of poetry. It drew rockets and astronauts across the void. And still it is there, unchanged in its orbit, unchanged in its light, watching over a restless Earth. We have travelled through its mysteries, through the whispers of Apollo astronauts, who spoke of sounds, lights and silences that do not fit the official record. We have lingered on the doubts of skeptics who wondered whether humanity truly walked upon its dust. We have heard the theories of scientists who puzzled over its density, its ringing seismic echoes and its isotopes that seem out of place. We have explored the visions of those who imagine it hollow a vessel, even a machine. We have wandered into the stranger stories, reptilian overseers, archons weaving illusions, shamans speaking of a moon brought into place by beings from the stars. We have stepped into myth where Selene drives her chariot, where Chia can flood the earth, where Chang'e drifts with her rabbit among the shadows. Each culture saw the moon differently, yet each saw it as powerful, intentional, more than mere stone. We have considered its influence on tides, on corals and turtles, on crops and calendars, on sleep and madness. We have felt it in our own rhythms, whether or not we notice. The moon is not far. It touches every ocean wave, every heartbeat in ways subtle and profound. And we have traced the modern race, Apollo and lunar Artemis, and Changi Chandrayaan and Kaguya. We have seen nations turn once again to the South Pole seeking ice fuel and footholds. We have seen politics and suspicion treaties and ambitions each casting the moon, not only as a satellite but as a prize. In all of this, one truth emerges: the moon has always been a mirror. In myth, it reflected gods. In science, it reflects our search for knowledge. In politics, it reflects ambition. In conspiracy, it reflects fear. It is constant, but what we see in it changes. We project ourselves onto its face, and it gives back our own questions. What then is the moon? A natural satellite born of a colossal collision billions of years ago. A hollow vessel placed in orbit by intelligence beyond our own. A regulator of cycles, tides, and dreams. Or is it all of these at once: stone and story, physics and poetry, myth and machine? Perhaps the answer is less important than the asking. The moon endures, and so do our questions. Each generation tells its own story, finds its own meaning. The Zulu spoke of its arrival. The Greeks sang hymns. The Maya carved it into their calendars. Apollo astronauts left footprints. Artemis will leave bases. And beyond each story lies another waiting to be told. The moon does not rush. It circles us with patience, a cycle of phases repeating endlessly. Waxing, waning, full new. Its rhythm is steady even when ours is not. It reminds us that time is larger than our lives, that the universe moves to a clock we cannot control. When you look at the moon tonight, you see what your ancestors saw. You see what future generations will see. A light in the darkness, a companion in the sky, a riddle that refuses to be solved. Its silence is its answer, and its glow is its gift. If there are watchers within, if there are signals, if there are secrets, they remain hidden. If there are none, then the mystery is ours, created by the human need to wonder. Either way, the result is the same. The moon makes us look upward, makes us think beyond ourselves, makes us dream. And perhaps that is its true purpose, not to control or to deceive, but to invite us into reflection. The moon does not speak, but it listens. It does not move quickly, but it keeps time. It does not give us certainty, but it gives us the gift of uncertainty, the chance to imagine. As this journey closes, let the moon remain what it has always been, a gentle presence steady in the night. Let its light calm the mind, soften the breath, and slow the thoughts. The questions may remain unanswered, but the silence is enough. Close your eyes. The tides will rise and fall. The moon will circle as it always has. And in its pale glow, even unseen, you may find rest.